From Anshe Sfard Beth El Emeth Congregation, it's time to take 10 Minutes for Torah with Rabbi Joel Finkelstein.
Welcome to our discussion of one very important aspect of the Pesach Haggadah. If we look in the middle of the Haggadah, all of a sudden the Haggadah bursts out in praise of God. Blessed is the one who kept his promise to Israel. Baruch Hu, blessed is he. Shakadosh Baruch Hu chishev laketz. God figured out and recalculated the end of the salvation of the Jewish people, the date of the salvation. Lasod kamash ne'amar v'lavraham avinu b'veit b'nam tarim, as Abraham was promised. Shne'amar v'yomer lavram yado teda ki ger yezaracha beretz lo lahem v'avadum v'nuotam 400 shana. That indeed Abraham should know that his children would be slaves in Egypt for 400 years in a foreign land, strangers in their land. God will punish the nation who afflict the Jews. Then they will go out of that land with great wealth. The Haggadah then goes on. And this has stood us in all generations. If not one alone tried to destroy us. In every generation, they tried to destroy us. And our Kadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, blessed be He, saves us from their hands. There's a promise to Abraham, and then the next paragraph says that this has stood us in all generations. The commentators struggle to understand, what does it mean, this has stood us? Did the promise of Abraham, that God made to Abraham, that his children would be slaves for 400 years, and then they would go out with great wealth, is that the promise that stood us in every generation? As God saved us from the oppressors, the days of Haman, Hitler, and the like? I'd like to suggest that we not try to connect these two paragraphs in that way. I recently saw the Haggadah, the Kolbo Haggadah, wonderful Haggadah. It gives 12, 15 answers as to what the meaning of the link between these two paragraphs could be. What has stood us in all generations? How did the promise of Abraham stand us in all generations to protect us from our detractors and those who wish to destroy us? The answer is that we need to know, where does this come from? Where does Vehisha Amda Lavotinu, this idea that this has stood us in all generations, where is that paragraph from? The one place it appears in Jewish literature is in the Pesikta. The Pesikta Derav Kahana, a collection, a midrashic collection from Eretz Yisrael, from the land of Israel, known as the Pesikta. There, it talks about the importance of the mitzvah of the Omer. We know that during Pesach, starting the second day, we count from the day of the waving of the barley flour offering. We begin to count 49 days until the 50th day on Shavuos. And the Medrash says that the mitzvah of the Omer is a very important mitzvah. It may seem like nothing. You take some barley, you grind it, and you wave it. You take a handful of it, you throw it on the altar. It doesn't seem very important. It doesn't seem like a very grand ceremony. Barley is not a very expensive food. It's associated with animals. Rabbis say, no, the Jews, they would put it in, they would sift it and sift it again. They went through so much as a ceremony to make sure that it would come out well. And Vehisha Amda Lavotinu, it's the mitzvah of the Omer, which has stood us in all generations. Rabbi Yochanan says, don't take the mitzvah of Omer lightly, because it was because of the mitzvah of the Omer that Abraham was able to conquer the land. Perhaps a connection to our reading here. In the days of Gideon, we see that he has a dream and he sees barley bread that's sort of rolling in the wind. What was that all about? That God was saying, through the mitzvah of the Omer, you, Gideon, in your day, you will be saved. And the rabbis go on, V'hisham lavotinu, b'mei Chizkiyahu, b'mei Chezkel. In all these days, Chezkel made a special bread, and it lasted him for a whole year. And the idea was that what lasted? The barley. The barley lasted. It was the barley that saved Chezkel, the prophet. It was the barley in the days of Haman. What does that mean? That Haman was coming to speak to Mordechai and send him on a great parade, and Mordechai didn't know what to do. And Haman came in and says, what are you people studying? And he says, oh, we're studying about the mitzvah of the Omer. It was Pesach time. So he said, what is that? How much does it cost? Does it cost 3,000 shekels? Does it cost 10,000 shekels? He says, nah, it just costs about 10 shekels. It's just a piece of barley. He says, your little barley for 10 shekels has beaten out my 10,000 silver pieces that I offered to kill the Jews. Because you're beginning to win the war, I am now about to give you a parade to celebrate you instead of me. So the rabbis claim that Vehi she'amda lavotenu, that it was this barley, this little puny mitzvah, that actually stood us in good standing. The question is, what does that mean? The mitzvah of the barley waving, the Omer, that's what saved us in all generations? One little mitzvah? I'd like to suggest that when we say that one mitzvah should not be light in your eyes, we say that one mitzvah could save us from everything else, we need to understand the nature of mitzvot. Every mitzvah, in a way, is its own world unto itself. Every mitzvah contains within it the DNA of all the 613 mitzvot. Every mitzvah in some way is equal to all the mitzvot. If there were only one mitzvah in the whole world, that would be enough. Dayenu. Like the mitzvah that they had in the Garden of Eden, one mitzvah covered it all. And what the Midrash is saying, that every single mitzvah is so important because it in some way inheres all of the mitzvot. He says, Vehi she'amda lavotenu. The middle of the Pesach Haggadah, especially which is read around the time of the Omer, and on the second night, it is the night of the waving of the Omer. This mitzvah is what gave Abraham the land of Israel, as it was promised in the covenant of the parts, the Brit Ben Abtarim. It was this mitzvah which stood us in all generations. As we're going to read in the subsequent paragraph about Laban who tried to destroy us, we know about Paro who tried to destroy us. And in fact, in every generation, it's the mitzvot that we do. But why the mitzvah of the Omer? Why is that significant? The mitzvah of the Omer represents also our wealth. We're waving our wealth. We're waving the potential we have to earn a living this year, to bring bread to the table, to feed our families. This wealth, if we wave it to God, if we give it to God, if we give even a handful of it to God, this will stand us in good standing in every single generation. Vehi she'amda lavotenu does not refer to the promise to Abraham. Vehi she'amda lavotenu is actually about the mitzvah of the Omer. And at this juncture in the Haggadah, we actually allude to the Omer, because after all, on the second day of Pesach, it is the first night of the counting of the Omer. Even on the first night, it's time of Pesach, a time of the Omer. And as such, the Haggadah, unbeknownst to many commentators, is actually referring to the mitzvah of the Omer. My teacher I once heard, Nassan Fried, he said, that's why we sing Vehi she'amda, that this has stood us again and again, in every generation. As the Midrash, the Psikta says, it's the days of Gidon, the days of Abraham, the days of Chizkiah and Haman and Yechezkel. It always stood us in good stead. Vehi she'amda, it stood in those days, and it'll surely stand in these days as well. Every single mitzvah we do has that potential. It's like a bombshell. It's like the atom bomb contains all the power of the whole universe, of the entire Torah. If we can keep those mitzvot, hopefully this will protect us from each of our enemies who try to destroy us in every generation. Thank you for joining us here at the Anshe Sfar Beth El-Emet congregation today in Memphis, Tennessee. I want to thank Jason Lefkowitz for making today's presentation possible. Thank you.
This has been 10 Minutes for Torah with Rabbi Joel Finkelstein.